Hello, I'm Tony Power. Welcome to the Just Culture Spotlight webinar series. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Just Culture Consulting. We work with organisations that are frustrated with their culture, people aren't speaking up, mistakes keep repeating, and leaders feel stuck. We help them fix that in a way that's fair and actually gets better results. This is the seventh webinar in this series. We've been doing them for around about every month or so. You can find previous episodes on our YouTube channel, and they're also accessible via the Just Culture Consulting website. These webinars are an opportunity to get some more information on various aspects of just culture, safety management, human factors, and then also an opportunity to ask any questions around these topics, from the very basic to the very advanced. The session today is around effective safety assurance. So what it is and why it matters. Most organisations, particularly in safety critical industries, have safety procedures, risk controls and compliance requirements in place. But how do they know whether these controls are actually working as intended? So this webinar explores that issue of safety assurance, the process that we use to verify that safety controls are effective and are being consistently applied in practice. The format for today, I'll speak for 20-25 minutes or so, and I will talk about why weak assurance systems frequently contribute to organisational failures, what distinguishes effective safety assurance from routine compliance activities, and the role of just culture in creating conditions where safety information can be relied upon for decision making. So I'll cover those aspects, and then we'll have around sort of 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. Having said that, please do feel free to post your questions anytime in the chat, and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as we go. And if I see a question, it's a natural place for it, I'll answer it then and there. Or alternatively, we'll circle back to any questions at the end. If you have any suggestions for future webinars, any topics that you'd like us to cover, please do feel free to put those in the chat as well. Or after this webinar, you can go to www.justculture.com.au/askquestions feel free to put those there. And it's also a place where you can get individual answers for questions if you have a particular question that you'd like us to look at. Really do encourage you to use that facility there. So getting on to our topic for today, safety assurance, and looking firstly, what is the purpose of safety assurance? Obviously, in high-risk industries, safety critical industries, we want to ensure that our workers and anyone else who might be impacted by our operations, as clients, customers, passengers, except contractors, we want to make sure that all those people are safe. And this is also something that the law requires of us as well. And so how do we do that? We do this by firstly designing and implementing safe systems of work. So that is things like the work environment, the equipment that we use, the people that we engage, employees and contractors, and how we train them. It is our procedures. It is how we design the work that we're going to do. And we want to make sure that those systems are as safe as they can reasonably practically be. And in order to design and implement those systems, we go through processes of risk management. So we do hazard identification, we do risk assessment, and we generate risk controls to eliminate or mitigate risk. And I'm sure many of you, as basic stuff, would be familiar with the hierarchy of controls, where ideally our risk controls will be at the top of the pyramid or the hierarchy. So where we can eliminate a hazard entirely, we'll do that, or if we can substitute a hazard for one that is less hazardous. Further down, we've then got engineering, where we are putting in place engineering measures to prevent or limit exposure to hazards. So that can be guards on machines or locating chemicals away from workers and things like that. And then the next one down, we have administrative, so this is our policies and our procedures, our instructions for dictating how the work is to be done, and in particular how it's to be done safely. And then finally, PPE, that personal protective equipment, so our safety glasses, our hard hats, our steel cap boots, and so on, so that if someone is exposed to a hazard of some sort, that the impact of that is mitigated. So we're going through and putting in place all of these risk controls. And so then where safety assurance comes in is around what is often called in work health and safety law supervision, which is not just supervisors supervising, but it's supervision of the systems of work. So that you might call that monitoring and training, and that is our safety assurance. So that is essentially, are our risk controls that we've put in place effective, and are those risk controls actually being followed? Are they actually happening on a day-to-day basis in our operations? And that's really the heart of safety assurance. And so the critical question when it comes to safety assurance, and this is something that I would say, if you take nothing else from this webinar, I would take this away. The critical question of safety assurance is, if a particular risk control was ineffective or not being followed, would we know? As an organisation, would we know? And if the answer to that question is no, then we know that we need to address our safety assurance of that risk control. And this is often where organisations find themselves in difficulty, is that they have risk controls in place, but they're either ineffective or they are not being followed consistently, and the organisation is not aware of it. And that's a quite common thing where unfortunately our safety assurance can be weak. And there are a number of reasons why this is. I'll give you a short summary of the ones that I often find. The first is that our organisations were often overly reliant on PPE and administrative controls, so safety procedures, in order to mitigate or eliminate risk. And sometimes, to be fair, those are the only ones that are available. The ones higher up in the hierarchy are not reasonably practicable. But even so, there is often an over-reliance on these types of controls. And that's understandable. These controls are quick. You can quickly write a new procedure, and they're cheap. Changing, the design, the work environment or the design of equipment and things like that tends to be more lengthy, tends to be more expensive. So it's understandable why we tend to fall back on administrative controls. The big weakness of those controls is that ultimately they rely on human behaviour. And one of the things that we know is that human beings are fallible. We make mistakes from time to time, even when trying our best. We know from driving, if we drive cars, that even if we're doing our best to obey all the road rules and do all the things and pay attention, do all the things we need to do, inevitably we will have those lapses of attention. We will make mistakes. So if we're relying on administrative controls, that's often where we'll get that we'll be vulnerable to those kinds of weaknesses. And it's why that usually that the law requires us, when we're designing our safe systems of work, to consider not just employees and workers who are vigilant, but also workers who from time to time will have moments of inattention or distraction, or who will make mistakes and so on. Another reason is poor design of work procedures. So when we are designing these safety procedures, unfortunately, more often than not, the quality is not great. They are often designed by people who are not necessarily the ones who are intimately involved in the work. So there may be a misunderstanding of what is practically able to be done. But also they tend to be designed for a normal day where everything is going normally. But the reality is that work happens in a dynamic environment, and the world is always shifting and changing around us. And workers are in a situation where they often have to adapt procedures that were created for an idealized situation for the messy reality of day-to-day work. And what often happens is you get this difference between the work as imagined, the work as our procedures have laid it out, and work as done, which is the work that happens on a day-to-day basis. And it's often in these gaps where organisations, again, have weaknesses in their safety assurance, because what they think is happening on a day-to-day basis is not what's really happening on a day-to-day basis, if nothing else, purely because it's a dynamic environment and procedures can't account for everything, even at the best of times. Safety assurance is often also strongly paper-based. So things like training sign-off sheets or forklift pre-inspection checklists, where people are signing off, yes, I've signed off that I've read and understood this piece of training or this procedure, or that yes, I've done the pre-inspection, I've ticked all the boxes and I've signed it off. But at the end of the day, all the paper shows is that the form was completed, not that what is actually on the paper is true. And so that, again, can be a gap in our safety assurance. That's compounded by the fact that audits often also focus on safety paperwork rather than the presence and effectiveness of our safety risk controls. They're also often focused on compliance. So it could be compliance with ISO standards, it could be compliance with legal requirements, but again, not necessarily on the actual risk controls or their effectiveness. So it might be looking at things like, have the work health and safety regular inspections been done? Yes, all the paperwork is complete, tick, tick, tick. Audit shows a green light. Doesn't necessarily say anything about whether those work health and safety inspections are actually effectively picking up any issues that they should be picking up. And then finally, in this non-exhaustive list, there's often a over-focus on metrics such as lost time due to injuries and things like that. And this weakness around metrics can be both leading and lagging indicators. So it's not always just a lagging indicator problem. Leading indicators can have this issue as well. But it's where you've got to focus on metrics as your sort of primary safety assurance mechanism. And those can often present a incomplete or misleading picture. For example, low LTIs, sometimes that can actually mean that an organisation is dangerously close to a serious incident or a fatality, because the low LTI is not a reflection of actually there being low levels of incidents. It may well be that it's due to low reporting rates because there's a culture of secrecy on site, where things are not being reported, perhaps because there's a punitive culture around things like that. An example of poor safety assurance can be seen, there are tons of examples, but one can be seen from a recent case from New Zealand, Gibson and Maritime, New Zealand. This was a case where a worker at the port of Auckland tragically died when a shipping container fell on him as he was lashing containers on board a container ship. And the CEO of the company was charged and convicted with failing to comply with a health and safety duty, that is to exercise due diligence in ensuring work health and safety. And some of the features of that particular incident was that they had a safety technology program that was going to be improving loading operations, which was going to be addressing higher levels of the hierarchy of controls. But that had been delayed for various reasons. And so in the meantime, they were largely relying on administrative control, so safety procedures. But the safety assurance of those administrative controls was ineffective. So firstly, the audits that they were doing were largely compliance-based rather than audits around safety effectiveness. There were some signals of gaps between work as imagined and work as done, but those were not followed up on. And there was also a lack of supervision, particularly on the night shift, which is where this incident occurred. So the company had the procedures in place, but those procedures were not being followed, and their safety systems were not picking up that those procedures were not being followed on a regular basis. So if we look at then, okay, well, what does effective safety assurance look like? What are the sort of the things that we want to be doing? And again, I want to come back to that central question, that critical question of safety assurance. If a particular risk control was ineffective or not being followed, would we know? And so when we are designing effective safety assurance, that's a question that we want to continue to come back to on a regular basis. So let's take training as an example and the effectiveness of training. Training is one of the absolutely critical central controls in any high-risk industry. And so it's vital that training is effective. So how do we know whether that training has been effective? I talked before about the classic, sign-off sheet that you've read and understood, that training as showing someone has signed the form, but not necessarily showing that training actually has been effective. So one way in which you can get safety assurance of training effectiveness is to ask workers to describe or to demonstrate the task or procedure that has been trained. So can you show me how you would do this particular task? And then to see whether or not they are able to do that. And that's something that you can obviously do, not just once you've done training immediately, but as on a regular basis, particularly if it's around critical safety training. So can they describe how they would report a hazard if they saw a hazard, or if there's a particular safety critical procedure, can they demonstrate that? And you can see the effectiveness or not of that training. Similarly, supervisor observations. So that's at a very simple basis of supervisors observing the work being done, and is it being done in accordance with the procedures? So those can be direct observations where the supervisor is directly observing, and not in a sense of policing and waiting to come down on people if they find that someone is deviating from a procedure, but approaching it with curiosity and openness to learning. So if they do observe someone deviating from a procedure, ask them, what led you to decide to do it that way? And that then opens up those opportunities first for organisational learning, to be able to understand where the drivers are, those systemic issues that might be causing people to deviate from a procedure, but also opportunities for those safety leadership conversations. Because the person says something along the lines of, "Oh, well, we're really busy today, and we've got a big backlog, and so I'm just sort of cutting this corner just to get it done a bit faster." That's an opportunity for the supervisor to then say, actually, it's when we're really busy that's when incidents can happen. And that's where it's really important that we stick by our safety procedures, because we want to make sure that everybody goes home safely at the end of the day. And it reinforces the message that the organisation cares about safety and cares about these things being done according to the procedures and how important that is. So it's really important for building that safety culture as well. Sometimes that direct observation is not practical. So there are other sort of ways of doing it. For example, like let's take the forklift inspections. Are the forklift inspections, are they actually being done, or is it being done as a tick box exercise? How would you know? One way of achieving that safety assurance is checking CCTV footage from time to time, observing someone doing the forklift inspection. Does it look like they are looking at all the things at the forklift that they should be looking at? That is one way in which you can get that safety assurance that this procedure is well adhered to. And obviously all this requires training for supervisors in what to look for. Consultation with workers is another really good safety assurance mechanism. So asking them, how would you do this task normally? Trying to establish a bit of a baseline. And then, do you ever do it differently? When and why? Oh, well, I would normally do it this way in accordance with the procedure, but actually sometimes both sets of equipment are being used by someone else for this other task. And so when that happens, we have to do something else. Again, helping to identify where maybe there are those weaknesses in your system that might be driving people to deviate from procedures, or some issue with the procedure itself that might need to be changed. Work health and safety inspections that you do regularly, focusing on controls, their presence, their effectiveness, their adherence. So are the machine guards in place? Is the equipment in good repair? And thinking about, well, what would you expect to see if the procedures were being followed? If the procedure was being followed, where would you expect the equipment to be? If equipment is not in good repair, do you see the tag that you would expect to see, and things like that? Audits, you want to make sure that you are part of the audit is checking again the presence and the effectiveness of controls. So making sure that you do safety audits about safety and not just about compliance. So for example, if you are checking paperwork, such as job safety plans or swims and things like that, does the paperwork not just have all of them been done, but do they demonstrate that say with a swim, that the hazards of doing a particular job were identified, that there were some risk controls to mitigate those hazards, and then did those risk controls actually get implemented when doing the work, so that does that paperwork reflect the effectiveness, or does it reflect just a tick and flick exercise? And if it reflects the latter, then that raises a question of, okay, what's going on? Why is that happening? And a further follow-up. Things like corrective actions coming out of things like audits and inspections and so on. Are these corrective actions closed? Not just are they closed within time, but what was the quality of the response to the corrective action? Did it actually address the underlying issue? And then was there then a follow-up to ensure that response to the corrective action was actually effective? So you're trying to get a sense of the quality of things rather than just have all the boxes being ticked. One really important thing around safety assurance when it comes to incident investigations, I would suggest, is if you have a minor incident or a near miss, don't assume that it's an aberration, that it's something that is out of the ordinary. Rather than making that assumption, satisfy yourself that it isn't systemic. So if it turns out, say, that a forklift pre-inspection was not done correctly, and there was an issue with the forklift, what would you assume that if anything that is a systemic issue? Satisfy yourself that it's not before assuming that, oh, it was just one particular thing on one particular day. When it comes to staff reporting, looking at not just how many staff reports that you're getting, but where in the organisation are they coming from, and what kind of quality is there, what is being reported, give you a better picture of the overall healthiness of your staff reporting system. But ultimately, what I would suggest is, particularly around critical risk controls, of having 3 levels of assurance. That is, cross-referencing with other data and asking, are they consistent? So, for example, the time that's being taken for certain tasks. Does the time that's being taken reflect that task being done according to the procedure? Or if it's not taking enough time, that's an indication that maybe the procedure might not be being adhered to. But cross-referencing that with other data, such as staff reports or audits and so on, are giving you a consistent picture. So again, around those critical risks, having 3 levels of assurance that your risk controls are in place and effective and are being adhered to. When it comes to the role of just culture in safety assurance, very quickly, for those of you who perhaps are not aware, just culture is around taking a non-punitive response to human error, but maintaining standards of accountability for things like acts of gross recklessness, malicious actions, and things like that. But the idea that you are creating conditions for people to feel safe to speak up about if they've made mistakes, or if they've encountered hazards or issues, so that you can then manage those and do that organisational learning. And just culture can really help to create those conditions for worker communication and openness, and help you identify those gaps between that work as imagined and work as done, so that you can understand, so you accept that this does happen from time to time, and you look to fix the system, not just punish those variations. So it help you identify those gaps that are critically important. It can give you early warning of issues, because people are more willing to report stuff that maybe they're not sure if it's an issue yet or not. So it can give you that early warning. It's another cross-reference with other safety assurance measures, which I talked about before. And it's also really important for identification and management of psychosocial risks. Things like workplace conflict, organisational justice, workload, job control, because these psychosocial risks often, before you actually have some sort of event, unless people report those issues, you might not know about them. And so creating that environment where people are willing and able to report is really, really important. I'm conscious of time, but I'll say something very quickly around legal liability. Ultimately, when it comes to work health and safety, particularly in the Western world, around courts are interested in, can you demonstrate safe systems of work, and can you demonstrate adequate training and supervision in those systems, and to ensure that those safe systems are being adhered to. So one example of that was a case, Safe Work New South Wales and 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 back in 2016. And this was a case where a couple of workers were moving a panel of glass, which fell on a worker, and he unfortunately died. And there, despite the fatality, the organisation was successful in defending a charge of breaching work health and safety duties, because they were able to demonstrate safe systems of work, and that those safe systems were well adhered to. They had training in a safe procedure for moving glass over certain sizes involving cranes and so on, which was very practical. They had induction, they had a buddy system with on-the-job training, they had regular toolbox talks. The workers could describe the procedure and how it was to be done, and they displayed awareness of the risks involved in the work, and so why they did it the way they did. And there was evidence of good supervision, that both the workers and supervisors described the procedure as being well adhered to. And there was strong evidence that this was an isolated incident, that a worker had disobeyed well-known and normally well adhered to safety procedures, and there were no formal or informal suggestions or indication that the organisation had wanted him to engage in this conduct. And there was no other reasonably practicable way of designing the work. It was, there weren't other available things in the hierarchy that were reasonably practicable. So this safety assurance of having effective safety assurance can be a really important way both of achieving a safe outcome, but even in circumstances where you don't, of having a legally defensible outcome. One interesting thing to note is that the system did not need to be documented to be effective and legally defensible. And in Wollongong, their system was largely verbal. It was not documented. So courts are not that interested into whether something is documented or not. It's, can you demonstrate a safe system of work, and can you demonstrate that it is effective and well adhered to. Okay, that's everything I want to talk about with regards to safety assurance. I know we're up against time, but I'll address a couple of questions if anyone's got one. I see there is one here. What role should executives and boards play in safety assurance, and what should they be asking? Yeah, it's a really good question. So if you're at a board level, it's really about safety governance rather than safety management. So it's about due diligence to ensure that the organisation is meeting its safety objectives. So you want to be asking those questions. Do we have systems in place to monitor safety performance? Do we have systems in place to ensure that risk controls are effective and they're being followed? And asking those kind of questions of management. And asking, okay, are those systems effective, and how do we know those systems are effective? Do we have do we have systems so that we know whether these things are happening? Do we have 3 levels of assurance in place for critical risks? Those are the kind of questions I'd be asking. And if all you're getting is headline numbers, asking what's driving those numbers. Give me some narrative or the story behind those numbers. Obviously not diving into the weeds, not diving into management and management of particular hazards and things like that, but it's at a, do we have effective systems in place? How do we know they are effective? Those are the kind of questions. All right, if anyone else has any other questions, please do post those now. I can stay around for another few minutes. But for those of you who have to go, thank you for joining us. I hope you found this webinar helpful. I know it was a lot in a short space of time. Our next webinar will be, I think it's Wednesday, the 26th of August, from memory. If you've got any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, please do send in those suggestions either in the chat now or through the website, www.justculture.com/askquestions. And if you've got any other questions around Just Culture, safety management, any of that sort of stuff, please do feel free to post those. I think I did see another question pop up there. Oh yeah, what are the most common indicators of a gap between work as imagined and work as done? So this often comes up again where organisations rely heavily on paperwork to prove compliance. And I'm not suggesting that you don't necessarily have paperwork, but you don't want paperwork to be your only assurance, safety assurance mechanism. If you're noticing, for example, that the incidents and near misses and things like that occur despite all the paperwork being in order, then that's showing you've got a mismatch between what your paperwork is, between your paperwork and what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis. If you're talking to workers and how frontline workers describe the job and how they go about things differently from managers, that's obviously a sign of a gap. And also where people are surprised by obvious operational realities. If those tricky issues on a particular day are a surprise to managers, and that's a signal that there's that disconnect between the world as imagined by people in head office and the world that is experienced by people on the front line. All right. I think that's not seeing any other questions there. So we'll oh, there is one here. What can we do when highly experienced employees knowingly deviate from safety procedures? Yeah, that's a really great question. And the first thing I'd say is, well, how do you know, short of actually having an incident, how would you know effective safety assurance? So some of the things that we've been talking about in this session. I would say sometimes this can come about because I think highly experienced employee, they might have a more refined sense of risk. They understand the risk of a particular task very well because they are highly experienced at it, and so that might perhaps they have a higher perhaps a higher risk tolerance as a result because they have a good understanding of it. There may also be a level of complacency. Someone's doing that, is highly experienced at doing that work. It always works out fine, and that can sometimes lead people to get a bit relaxed with things. I would say first be curious. Ask, why are they deviating from safety procedures? There may be some issue with the system that you they might actually be doing it in a better way that you could actually learn from and improve your system. Sometimes it might be one of those situations where, no, you've got to bring the person back to the procedure. There's a level of coaching that needs to be done there. And that can be around, look, I know that that you're highly experienced at this job and you can see the risk perhaps more, better than other people. But part of safety leadership is presenting a good example to other workers, particularly ones who are less experienced, who may not have that same ability. And so it's really important to exercise that leadership in showing them the right way to do it in accordance with the procedures. Sometimes there can be an issue with safety attitude where someone is quite stubborn in thinking that, this is not a big deal. I can do it however I want. And those are the kind of cases that I do get really worried about. Even after there's been an incident, if someone is displaying a poor safety attitude, I'm often more worried about future safety resulting from that attitude than I am about the incident that's just happened. And so now I want to think about what's the safety attitudes like in the organisation as a whole. Again, is this systemic? And does it reflect how the organisation approaches safety in general, or is this an issue? Or is this an issue with this particular individual? And so, yeah, I would want to discount the systemic before focusing just on the individual. But sometimes you might need to address that as a personal conduct matter if that safety attitude, if a poor safety attitude is there and it is isolated to an individual, because that can be quite corrosive to the safety culture in a particular workplace. But like I say, I would try to eliminate the systemic first before just focusing on one individual. Okay. Anyone got any other questions before we finish up for the day? No, I think that's it. Okay, well, like I say, if you do have any questions that occur to you after the webinar, please do go to the website and fill out the form there. We're happy to help you provide any answers that we can around that. Please, hope you'll join us for the next webinar. Have a great rest of week. And yeah, hope to see you next time.